Hey guys, welcome back to Your Lake Fork Guide. Another episode of the Guides Network today. And this week is the week of the Berkley Big Bass Tournament out here on Lake Fork. So, I really wouldn't be doing a very good job if I didn't tell you guys a technique that I think would work great for the Berkley tournament. The Berkley tournament is unique because you can only use Berkley baits in that tournament. And if I had one bait to use from Berkley that will work well this time of year out here on Lake Fork, it's going to be the power worm. So today we're going to talk about Texas rigging and old worm. Well guys, Texas rigging a worm is probably not foreign to any of you. I'm going to walk you through my setup, how I like to go about it. So a couple little tricks that I like to do to try to help me be more efficient when I'm fishing a Texas rig and catch more and bigger fish when I'm doing so. But it's certainly something that if you bass fish, you've definitely used a Texas rigged ribbon tail worm before. You know, unique to Lake Fork is this time of year, those ribbon tail worms really excel. Just kind of going pond fishing in the back of a cove or the back of a creek can do you a lot of good. These fish are making their fall migration. A lot of them are all the way back in there already. And just sometimes the simplest fishing can be the most effective. And it seems to be the case every October out here on Lake Fork. There's a great just Texas rigged worm bite. Now during the Berkley tournament, you can only use Berkley baits, but you can use terminal tackle from other companies. And you'll hear me mention the word 6 cents fishing a lot today. My rods, my terminal tackle, my hooks, everything is gonna be from 6 cents fishing. I don't know if many of you know, but they have recently come out with a whole line of hooks and they're absolutely outstanding. Just like everything 6 cents does. When they release a product, it's always the very top of the line, as good as you'll find on the market anywhere. Hey, I want to let you guys know, if you need to order anything from 6centsfishing.com, which is linked in the description of this video, when you go there and you place an order, be sure you punch in the discount code, Your Lake Fork Guide. You'll get a 10% discount on all orders. All right, let's get into the gear. First thing is the rod. You know, when I'm fishing a bait real slow like a Texas rig, sensitivity is of utmost importance. You know, there's some baits we fish like a lipless crankbait or a chatterbait or some of these other moving baits, topwater baits certainly would fall into this category. Sensitivity is not really, I mean, you want a good sensitive rod, but it's not like the end all to be all. You don't have to have the most expensive, most sensitive rod. But when I'm going to be dragging a bait and really soaking it, I want to feel the subtlest of bites. And when it comes to that, the aptly named Century Series from 6 Cents Fishing is as good as anything on the market today. It's as high-end gets. It's at a $250 price point, which is a fair price for the elite type of rod you're getting here. And I promise you, you will not find a lighter, more sensitive rod anywhere. The model that I choose to use for Texas rigging is going to be the 7.4 medium heavy in that Century Series. Now, I like a long rod. I like to be able to move a lot of line and create a lot of leverage to drive those heavy gauge hooks home. You know, Texas rigs, we use pretty stout wire hooks, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But so you need a long rod to drive that big nail through that fish's through that fish's head. You know, if you think about it like this, if you're going to hit a nail into a piece of wood, if it's a little bitty finishing nail, you don't need a very big hammer. You can just tap it and it'll go in. But the thicker that nail is, the harder you got to hit it and the bigger hammer you need. Same thing with hooks, guys. The heavier gauge the wire is, the bigger, heavier action rod you're going to need to drive that hook home on the hook set. Now, you'll notice I have nothing tied up here. I want to show you guys how I rig everything up from top to bottom. So the first thing we're going to get, 6 cents peg stoppers, bobber stoppers, whatever you might want to call them. All right, so once they come out, they're going to look like this right here. They'll be on little tabs, and you can see that little wire loop right there above each little rubber bobber stopper. You're going to take your line, put about an inch of your line through that wire loop or a ½ inch, whatever you're comfortable with, and then simply slide it down onto your line. Your line will fold over, pop through, and now you can grab the tag into your line and slide your bobber stopper up. The next thing that's going to come in, we got some 6 cents pitch black tungsten. This is chip proof tungsten. The paint will never, ever, 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 ever go away on this tungsten right here. Now for a Texas rig, if I'm fishing shallow, which is the one I'm rigging up right now, I'm going to go ahead and use a 1/4 ounce tungsten weight. If we're fishing out deeper, I'm probably going to use a 3/8. If it's real windy, I might use a 1/2. But really, a 1/4 ounce weight is going to get done mostly what you need to get done. And for the hooks, I'm going to choose a 5/0 hook, and I'm going to use the Ox flipping hook. Now, the reason I'm choosing the Ox flipping hook right now is because I'm fishing around a lot of vegetation on Lake Fork, a lot of flooded vegetation and a lot of under the water aquatic vegetation and some lily pad stems. Basically, some really heavy, dense cover. So I want a big, heavy gauge hook so I can really swing the hammer hard when I set the hook and really horse that fish out of the heavy cover. When you know 6 Sense Fishing's got you covered on trimming your line too. These are some brand new titanium scissors. They cut braid like butter. Are very, very durable. They're just awesome. You need this in your life. If you fish a lot and you use big line, you're going to want some of those. Okay, we've got our hook tied on. You know, I told you I'm using the big Ox flipping hook. Now, I will tell you, if you're fishing a little more scattered timber, scattered grass, or you just don't like using that heavy gauge of a hook, 6 Sense does offer an offset straight shank worm hook that has a little thinner wire that it will work very well. If I was going to that one, I'd probably use the 4/0 for this application on that hook. And here comes the meat and potatoes. If I had one bait to pick from Berkley to throw this time of year, it's going to be the Berkley Power Worm. This right here is a green pumpkin worm, but you can throw blue fleck, black with blue flake. Plum apple is more of a summertime deal for me, but it does still work occasionally. June bug can be a really good color. But one thing I know about green pumpkin, I don't know if it's the right color, but I'm 100% sure it's not the wrong color. Like, they're not gonna not bite it because it's green pumpkin. So I like to throw green pumpkin a lot of the time. Now, a couple little tricks about rigging your worm up. You wanna make sure when that worm is sitting on your hook that the tail, the ribbon tail, where it folds, is pointing up the same way the hook point is, so that when you're dragging that bait through the water, that ribbon tail's pointed up. That's going to give your ribbon tail more action. So you're going to want to make sure that your hook point comes out on the same side that the bottom of the tail is. And we're going to put it on there about 1/4 inch, push it through, slide it up over the keeper, slide it back down, snug it onto the keeper right there. And then all we're going to do is bury this hook point right in the middle of this worm. Guys, when you're fishing a Texas rig, you're going to be hammering this hook home. Don't worry about getting it right on the edge. Don't worry about skin hooking it. Just bury that hook right in the center of this worm. They're not that thick of plastic as it is. So what I'll do right here is I'll lay the worm this way and I'll measure it so I can see where I need my hook point to come in for that worm to lay perfectly straight. Got it marked with my thumb. Bunch it up, slide it in right to the middle of the worm, and now I have a perfectly straight rigged worm ready to fish. Take our weight, slide it down, take our bobber stopper, slide it down. We're ready to go. That's absolutely a fish catching rig. This is an 8-inch worm right here. You can use a 7-inch. You can use a 10-inch, especially if you're fishing out deep. I would highly recommend using the 10-inch worm. But this right here is just your standard old 8-inch worm like we all grew up through it in Grandpa's pond. Notice how that curl tail curls up the same way the hook points. That's going to give your ribbon tail more immediate action as it's falling in the water. It's not going to run sideways on you. The tail's not going to kick out to the side. It's going to fall straight in line. It's really going to make that tail kick that much harder. For my line on this setup, guys, I'm using 17 to 20 pound fluorocarbon. Actually, Berkley makes a very good 100% fluorocarbon. You can use that. I think you're free in the Berkley tournament to use other line, but Berkley does make a very good 100% fluorocarbon. 17 to 20 pound. Remember, you got a pretty big rod. You got a big hook. You got big hook sets. You got big bass and heavy cover. You're going to want a strong, tough line. So I wouldn't go below 17. I honestly would probably recommend using the 20 pound test. All right, let's talk about the areas for just a second. This time of year, it's simple. It's the fall of the year. These fish are pushing back into pockets and back into creek arms. I would not be fishing anything too much on the main lake. I'm really going to find pockets inside of creek arms and really go to the backs of creeks a lot. I'm going to look for water clarity. If I notice that one creek is particularly dirty than the other, I'm going to favor the cleaner water. These fish are very visual. They're chasing a lot of bait right now, and they certainly do tend to seek out the cleaner water in the fall of the year. So look for that as a clue. Now, other than that, I'm looking for vegetation, guys. Vegetation is the X factor. All these creeks and coves on Lake Fork, they all have a lot of cover. They all have a lot of timber. They have docks. They have all flooded shoreline vegetation. But the ones that seem to hold the most and the best fish all have one thing in common. That's underwater aquatic vegetation in the form of coontail or hydrilla grass. I want to find that in plentiful quantity, and I want to find it where it's scattered and not just a solid mat or not just a thin line. I want to find a big flat area in the back of a cove or a creek where that grass scatters around and I can fish this worm in between all those holes and all that space in between. Also, the presence of bait fish. The presence of bait fish. Fall is all about bait fish. These bass follow the bait fish religiously in the fall, and so if you're not seeing signs of bait fish in this shallow water that we're fishing in the backs of these coves and creeks, you're probably not in the right area. It becomes pretty obvious pretty quick when you get around these bait fish in the backs of these coves. So keep your eyes peeled. Look for the shad flickering on the surface. Look for a little bit of schooling activity every now and again, and that's going to clue you in to being in the right area. All right, now let's get up and talk about how we retrieve this bait. It's a simple bait to fish, but there's certain things to pay attention to that are going to make you more efficient, going to make you land a higher percentage of your bites. So let's go over that now. All right, guys, you know, with this 7.4 medium heavy rod and this Texas rig, this worm's got a little weight to it. You got a 1/4 ounce tungsten sinker on it. You can certainly make long casts. I don't really recommend making long casts. One of the advantages of having this worm is it's 100% weedless. So you can be really target oriented. You can find stumps, you can find patches of grass, you can find lily pads, you can find dot corners. You can be really target specific with this bait, but you have to be fairly close to do that. So I don't recommend just making huge long casts and just dragging it across. To me, that's not the right way to fish a Texas rig. It's not the most efficient way. The most efficient way to fish this bait is going to be to pitch it or to make short casts directly to targets, getting it really tight to those targets. So to pitch the bait, all you got to do is get it about even with your reel handle, hold your rod tip down, push your button, and then just lift your rod and drop your bait at the same time, and it'll go on out there. And if you'll practice that, you can get really accurate real quick with that. Also, just making short roll casts to targets works well like that as well. So we make fairly short casts and be really accurate with little roll casts like that. Now, once the bait's in there, this is important. You got to let the bait get to the bottom. That's one of the most important things. If you're fishing really shallow, it's not that hard to do. But if you're going to fish this out deeper, one of the most important things you can do is to make sure and ensure that your bait actually gets to the bottom. I can't tell you how many people I see throw that Texas rig out there, here in a second or two they start dragging it. I'm like, it's already halfway back to the boat because you started dragging it too early. You have to strip a little line. The deeper you're in, the more you need to strip, and let that bait get all the way to the bottom. That's important. Once your bait has reached the bottom, let's talk about rod positioning and how you need to bring this bait back to you in order for you to have the most sensitivity. Because a lot of these bites on these baits that just sit dead still, the bite will be very subtle and very light. You can go ahead and point your rod down to where it's basically pointing straight out in front of you and reel up your slack, but once you start moving the bait, okay, you want to make sure you're bringing your rod tip up. Okay, guys, this is going to help you feel everything. Right now, if a fish breathes on that bait, I'm going to feel it. With this Century Series rod and having that rod in the correct position where I have resistance against that line, I will feel any little thing that touches that bait. I'll be able to feel the bottom content. I'll be able to feel a piece of brush. I'll be able to feel grass as it begins to put tension on the bait. And most importantly, any little subtle bite from a fish, I will 100% feel it in this position right here that I'm in now. So always keep that rod, when you're moving that bait, always keep that rod from straight out in front of you to about 1 o'clock. And then bring it back down and repeat. Never, ever, 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 ever move a Texas rig with your reel handle. You do not move this bait. You do not work this bait with your reel handle. The only thing your reel handle is for is to pick up your slack and to reel in your fish. That's it. When you're working this bait, you're only working it with the rod. You do not work it with the reel handle. Now, there's a couple different ways to retrieve or work this bait back to you to get bites. The first one is actually one of the most effective that I don't think gets done enough. It's just drag the thing. And when you drag it, it's important to drag it at a very, very, very slow pace. So just take that rod, reel up your slack, and just start dragging. And just creep it along the bottom as slow as you can stand to creep it. And then you probably need to slow down a little bit more. Now, the other way to do it is to give it short hops and hop it up off the bottom and let it fall. This is also a very effective way, especially if the fish seem to be a little more active. You're going to want to give that bait more action to draw them into it and entice them into biting. So what you'll do is, again, point your rod straight out, reel up your slack, and then just give it little sharp hops till you get to 1 o'clock, and then come back down. Little sharp hops, and then come back down, just like that. That's really about the only two ways that I ever fish a Texas rig. I'm either hopping it or I'm dragging it, and that's about it when it comes to Texas rig worms. Now, one other thing to think about when you're fishing a Texas rig is how you're going to set the hook. So what you want to do is, if you're fishing along here, you really want to make sure you take your time. Guys, especially with the shallow one, the 1/4 ounce weight, these fish aren't just going to let go of it. They're going to hold on to it. There's not much weight there. So you have time to prepare yourself to set the hook. You don't have to be in a big hurry. So if you're dragging that bait up and you feel a bite, right? You can take time, point your rod down, reel up your slack, really get your feet set, get ready to turn your hips so that you can get a big hook set to drive that big hook home. So I'm going to go ahead and reel up, feel all my slack. Okay, fish is still there. I check him up, he's moving with the bait, I can feel the fish. Now I'm going to turn my hips and set this hook, pull this rod from right here up to my right shoulder as hard and fast as I can. And that's going to ensure that I move as much line as possible, and then I really put a lot of pressure on that fish and drive that big heavy gauge hook in. Well guys, that's it. That's all my Texas rig tips for plastic worms, man. It is a great time-tested, proven technique. It's probably caught more bass than every other bass fishing technique combined over the years when you combine everybody that uses it, because everybody from the time they're a kid till the time they're a grandpa uses a Texas rig ribbon tail worm. Hey, we sure appreciate you guys watching today. Hey, good luck at the Berkley Big Bass Tournament. And remember, if you're not really that familiar with Lake Fork, you're coming down here for this big tournament. Maybe you'd like a little advantage on helping you locate some fish, get to a starting point and kind of figure out the patterns a little bit faster. Be sure you check out the Fish Life app. Go subscribe to the Lake Fork package. You'll find a list of waypoints giving you the most current, updated information on what those areas are and what baits are working right now. And as always, it is linked in the description. Hey, one more time, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time right here on your Lake Fork Guide.